Russell T here, Russell the Davies. Russell the Davies, 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 Russell the Davies.
Years and years and years, yeah. It's Rusty's brand new show. Is it keto? Clear away those fears, yeah. It's Rusty Davies, count the miles down the road. Years and years and years, yeah. Let's watch a brand new show. His chimney blows. Clear away those fears, yeah. Let's watch a new show, cause Doctor Who sucks.
Who cares about years and years? Episode 5, 2028. Okay, so 5 episodes in now. Christmas 2027 to Christmas 2028. And this week we have one more Englishman and one more Australian man, so we're completely evened out. What did everyone think of the new episode?
I felt this one was, plot-wise, it was leaner than the previous episodes. I think it was very stripped back this week to focus on, I'd say maybe the main story of Stephen and these concentration camps starting to happen, with that other thread of Edith discovering what's going on there. There wasn't quite as many narrative fireworks, I felt.
Leaner and meaner, given Stephen to Victor in this episode.
Yeah, indeed.
Katz, what did you think?
I thought it was really good. I like that they're sort of leaning in on the thriller aspect of it. I'm kind of surprised. I was expecting it to be a more typical r.t.d. style drama, but it's sort of, there was that scene in the filing cabinet room. The action's really amping up, which makes me excited for the next episode.
I liked all those thriller sections had really nice Murray Gold music. It was reminding me of Miracle Day and those kind of things where you had the little boop-de-boops music when someone's on a computer investigating whatever. But yeah, Morph, what did you think of episode 5?
Yeah, I also really enjoyed it. I thought it was, it definitely made a change from the, it's normally tense and dramatic, but this one was kind of somber and it had a tone to it that kind of was fitting of Danny's death, and it was leading, obviously, into whatever's happening in episode 6.
I thought it was interesting how it started. Katz, you'll probably have thought this too, with the arresting press. That was... Normally these episodes are timely to Britain, but this felt very timely to us, don't you think? Press getting raided, arrested.
With that AFP raid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought they were a podcaster at first. I was going to make some comment, but no, they're a radio show. There's a thing in the background, some logo.
Did you guys catch that the guy they arrested, when the cops kind of came in to drag him away, I only caught this on the rewatch by looking at the subtitles, but they actually said, I'm arresting you for the possession of indecent images of children.
Oh,
that's literally why, yeah, that's the kind of the charge that they're bringing the guy in on. It's an interesting detail r.t.d. just kind of slipped in there.
Yeah, that recontextualizes my reading of the scene. Do you think it was a real charge?
That's the question, isn't it? I think it's the ambiguity. Like, sure, I mean, he could well be, a pedo who they've dragging in on entirely legitimate premises, or it could be that, this has all been slightly cooked up because they just want to suppress the whole disappeared thing.
We have so little information that I don't feel like trying to work out if he is or not, because it feels like just judging the actor's appearance.
I thought the indecent images thing was very Mycroft of Viv.
As in Mycroft of Sherlock?
Yeah, exactly.
I can't comment.
Well, let's remember, Nia hasn't watched Sherlock, so we're still on lockdown there. He'll do it eventually. I'm sure he will. And if he doesn't, he'll be joining Dilbert.
Speaking of someone standing alone, Vivian was all about the UK being magnificent and standing alone. When in the montage intercutting with the guy getting arrested, when she was saying, "I promise you freedom and the ability to enjoy that freedom," and all that non-specific kind of stuff. What did you think of her speech?
That speech gave me very much, it was a bit of that no-deal Brexit thing. It's that sort of rhetoric of how, even though we're on our own and everyone has abandoned us and UNIT has been shut down because international partners have withdrawn and all of that, shit, we'll still be fine. British spirit will carry us through. So it's very on point. It's laser accurate to the present day, and I thought the speech itself was very funny in its wording. We're gonna enable ourselves to enable ourselves, or whatever the hell it was she was saying, and intercutting that with the radio guy just criticising her speech it was on the nose, but it was very funny.
She reminded me of that. There was a video circulating around Twitter a few days ago of that Change UK MP. I forget what.
Yes.
I forget what she was exactly saying. She was saying like, "Look in your hands and the powers in your hands." It was just like absolute nonsense. Remind me.
Yeah, that was Joan Ryan. Yeah, she got everyone to put your hands in front of you. Look at your hands. That's where the future is. It's in your hands. Which is very funny. I mean, I'm imagining in the case of Joan Ryan, her hands is probably covered with the blood of Palestinian children, but let's not go there.
What are they calling themselves now?
I think they're going to be the Independent Group for Change now, because they can't be Change UK anymore because they got legal action from Change.org. Yeah, after they're all quite. That's a very funny story there. So they're on like their 5th different name now or something.
Well, it's very holistic. They're embodying the spirit of change in that ever slippery name.
And ever slippery polling.
I can't think of a natural segue for this, but what did you think of Lee and Lincoln, so Rosie's kids, both played by new actors? Did you think it was distracting or kind of believable in how, at that age, kids' growth spurred up and they look pretty different?
Lincoln's I didn't really notice, but Lee had a growth spurt, clearly, so I noticed him.
It was kind of the other way around. Lee's, I think he looked very naturally like an older version of the earlier actor.
Yeah.
Lincoln, I thought, looked heaps different. I mean, obviously different build and posture and height and everything, but the face, I think, looked a bit different too. But anyway, I really liked the new Lee. I liked when he was bagging out his mum about how she shouldn't have ratted on him for doing whatever he was in the streets, and that she shouldn't blame their zone being criminal zoned on him because it was her calling the cops, which would have led to stats that eventually got assessed as such. He was just the one doing the crimes.
I was going to say, I'm not sure that you all agree, but I think this is the sort of series that you do kind of need, 9-10 episodes for to really flesh out all of these things. I would really love to see Lee involved in criminal activity. I'd love to see Lincoln grow up fully into, and we might, but there's only 1 episode left and there's a lot to do. So I feel like there should have been a bit more time to really go into all of these things, Well,
Lee was starting to look like the kid from This Is England, so if you want more episodes on someone who looks like that, there's plenty for you.
Just go watch This Is England.
Yeah. Although with that, I feel it's not just Lee and Lincoln, also there's Ruby as well. Like, that generation of the kids has kind of been put to the side for most of the story, and I'm a bit conflicted about the whole should have had more episodes thing. I think it's very lean, it's very tight, it's very concise, and that can be a good thing. Like, it would have been quite interesting to see Lee getting involved in criminality and stuff, but at the same time, the show is quite clear and sort of deliberate with its choices of focus, and I'm not really inclined to kind of go after the show for it just yet. Like, we'll see after episode 6, I think, whether they kind of made the right choices there.
I know the irony of saying this as Doctor Who watchers, but I always think, less is more. You should leave a series wishing there were more episodes than kind of petering out of it or thinking some bits were repetitive or whatever. Would you be in a criminal zone, do you reckon, anyone, if you were in 2028?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, our house has been burgled, so probably.
I live in a very bourgeois area, so I don't think so.
Yeah, it was very much a class-based thing, wasn't it? Like, we got that detail of Viv is doing it to the estates. So these estates are basically becoming like criminal areas pretty much based on class.
I don't think it was explicitly mentioned in the story, but it was in the synopsis that the police have been privatized.
What?
Yeah, I swear it said in the episode 5 synopsis, the one that was released early and had quite a few spoilers in it, that the police were now privatized, but it didn't say that in the episode.
No, release the Davies cut. We need to see this stuff. Do we need a novelization? Is this the limbo? Instead of getting more episodes, we need the scripts novelized so we can see this kind of stuff. Because that sounds really interesting. Privatized.
A novelization of this would be great. Like, this is ripe for a novelization. That'd kick ass.
And r.t.d was so good at it too when he novelized Rose. That was a really excellent transformation. But he'll never do this. He's pushing forward. He's got The Boys next year. Speaking of, I guess, class settings getting worse, I was surprised how Victor's kind of prison limbo pre-deportation thing looked pretty fine, almost like fairly comfortable. Like, I'm sure it's not that pleasant to live in, but like there were couches, the room seemed fairly big-ish. What did you think of that setting? Where Stephen visited him?
It reminded me of the sixth form common room at my old school, with just the chairs and the flimming carpet.
I think it's a bit of a pretense, isn't it? I think it was meant to show how visitors can come in and see that, you know, it's fine. We get a party. We can even have a couple of drinks over the New Year's.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And then eventually, you know, that they go into these concentration camps, which, you know, they can be concentration camps with oranges. It'll still be called a concentration camp. And then it can get worse.
Even in that place itself, the dormers might be really cramped and terrible, but the visiting waiting room might be comfy for pretense, like you say. Yeah, I can see that. That's very government-ish. Well, speaking of Victor, I've got I won't be like Ingiga was a few weeks ago and Crow, very happy with myself, but unfortunately I was more on point than I wished to be last week when I said I think the Lions aren't going to be too happy with Victor when I opened the door to Danny's place. They weren't physically, well, Rosie did hit him actually, but she hugged him afterwards. And then Stephen says the sisters seem to be the one most concerned with his welfare, you know, after the fact. So Rosie's fine. I've forgiven her, but wow, Stephen's utter hatred of Victor is alarming, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I must admit I ate a dick on that one. Like, the family were definitely more hostile towards Victor than I expected, and especially Stephen. Obviously, Edith's the big, you know, activist, you know, woman, and she has kind of that compassion. She visited Victor 2 weeks ago, but like, you know, oh my God, Stephen, I couldn't believe it when he was just telling Victor that it's all your fault, you know, and it's like, what? Didn't we have this whole thing about how it's not Victor's fault? They were torturing him, and it's like, holy shit, how did Stephen get to this place?
I can believe it. I think it makes a lot of sense in retrospect. You just have to look at the character's name and think of why Russell might be so resentful of him.
Oh, God.
Yeah, when Stephen was saying I was so bored to Victor about all of Victor's troubles over the years, that was the thing I was really verged at Rosie for saying in early episodes, like when she hung up when Danny called her on the fridge about what's the issue was with Victor now. It's such a infuriating attitude to have that, you know, Stephen's obviously not well off in life, you know, all the jobs he's working. He's not in great straits, but even so, like, just the sheer attitude and disdain for those even worse off. It's really alarming. I dislike it a lot, and it's all too believable.
Well, he's always a banker at heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you know, even more humiliating was Ralph, the guy partially responsible for Victor's troubles in the first place, being at the ash scattering instead of Victor. That's just, really rubbing his face in the dirt.
I can't help but think that Ralph probably isn't even cognizant of the role he played in Danny's death. Like, I absolutely believe he has not made that mental link at all. We saw how dense he was in the first episode. I bet he thinks that, I did my duty, you know, I snitched on him to the feds or whatever. Like, it's fine, you know, who cares? It's not my fault.
It was interesting how long it took the ash scattering to happen because of, how many days of rain was it? Like 60, 70?
80 days.
What is like the regular amount of consecutive rain days you get over there?
In the UK,
I mean, I wouldn't have said any more than 10, but that's a complete guess. You'd have to Google it.
It's interesting. It looks pretty rough. I've been in a big flood before, but the consistency of endless rain sounds, you know, even worse in some days. Just thinking of all the infrastructure it would disrupt. And like they were saying, sewage covering up houses and coastal erosion leading to more homeless. It's like what David, last podcast, was saying about climate refugees. It's very easy to see the specific ways these sorts of things will come about. You know, so much displacement just born of environmental issues, born of climate change in its specific forms, like this endless rain.
I just did a quick Google, and apparently, like, there's been 89 days of rain in a row in Scotland once, and there was 82 in Wales in about 2016. So it's not unheard of, but it's certainly something that's uncommon for the vast majority of the country to get, like, 80 days of rain in a row. And, you know, and obviously the huge flooding and stuff, that's clearly a climate change thing.
This was, Big Finish did this in Torchwood, Gods Among Us Part 1, I think. I haven't listened to it yet, but I remember one of the synopses was about endless rain and how to Torchwood deal with it. So it's very much a... no, I really can't link that, but
I mean, it's a thematic link because this show is basically turning into Torchwood, isn't it?
Oh, very true, very true.
Yeah, you don't have to cut this from the edit now because I've linked it back to the show.
Well, now that you've got my equivalents there back in business, I was thinking when those schoolgirls were talking about how they have to use paper again now, how happy David Brent would be. Wernham Hogg back in blustering business now with paper fueling back up. He doesn't have to be made redundant anymore.
Does Woody vaguely remind you of David Brent? Just some of the stupid shit he says.
Oh, Stephen's friend, the oily guy.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I can cut. He's way too dominant and like successful, but the attitude I can definitely see. Ricky Gervais.
The stupid jokes and laughing at himself reminded me of Ricky.
I can definitely see that now. That's quite funny.
He reminded me of sort of Alan Sugar mixed with Eric Trump.
It's an interesting amalgamation of different people. I really liked not personally the character, but such a great figure, such a good foil for Stephen as well. I loved that tying back to, I think, episode 1 when Stephen and Danny were like the soul men recognizing reality and objectivity in the world, and they basically were. And that having to be brought back, Stephen brought to heel by having to say maybe Hongchuo didn't happen. This whole reality cognition stuff, I thought that was really a good way to bring it back. And it's just horrifying to see these people deny things that we saw happen, we know for a fact happened. And he might even, the oily David Brent dude might, full well know happens, but it's not in his interest to, it's not in his business to. It's just disgusting.
I thought it was interesting how they linked that idea of, just unshaken belief and willingness to accept conspiracy theories with this hierarchy of obedience. Like, in order for Stephen to join the group, he has to show sort of his willingness to just be a lackey and just be overruled by showing his consent to this, absurd conspiracy theory. That was quite an interesting link there, I think, that was made.
What did we think about Viv and Stephen's meeting?
I thought Emma Thompson played that beautifully. I loved seeing the difference between the private Viv and the public Viv.
Yeah, she seemed very vulnerable.
Thompson is incredible.
I liked the tone. It felt kind of mythic to me, this figure that we've only seen. I mean, Rosie did meet her, but it wasn't the same. It was at a public press event where this was such an actual meeting between these two significant characters. I loved the conversation, and I had to think of Dilb when she said, "They'll kill me," and we didn't know quite who. I was thinking back to some of Dilb's less politically correct statements he made in the second podcast about globalists. Did we think it was that type of people? Did we think it was the people themselves? That was my first instinct, that she meant the actual population of Britain would rise up against her if so-and-so happens, but that doesn't sound quite right to me.
I thought so initially, when she says, "They'd kill me," and then Stephen kind of looks at her funny, and then she says, "They would have me killed." And that line that's not the same thing, is it?
Yeah, there's a difference between killing someone and having someone killed. Like, the latter implies you can put it into action somehow. You can have someone else do it for you, and that gave me very strong vibes of there's sort of the three families, the committee, the Illuminati. Yeah, I mean, it was that sort of thing. Certainly with Miracle Day, we had that idea of like a huge shadowy conspiracy. Elsewhere in R.T.D, you've got the Naismiths in the End of Time. He's like this thing of like this cabal of rich people controlling everything, and certainly we might not ever see who is actually pulling Viv's strings, but they're there, I think.
I couldn't really tell whether it was some actual sort of world order like that controlling her, or whether it was just her succumbing to that paranoia that all authoritarian leaders seem to get, that there's people within the government that are going to usurp them, so they need to hold their power no matter what.
I think Morph will disagree with me here, but I don't like this approach where there's like an overseeing entity even more powerful than the authoritarian figure that are pulling the strings or going to punish them if they do what. I feel like it just kind of removes a lot of the culpability, and like so much has been built around Vivian's character and her specific views or lack of them and ways of handling public relations and that kind of thing. Pulling it back and having her in some kind of servitude, or at least cahoots with a vague, mysterious entity. It's like Ingiga, the Alan Moore thing about why conspiracy theories and that kind of stuff are uncreative and not realistic, because it makes things too simple and too narrativized.
in this case, I think entities like, well, forces like that kind of sense of a shadowy presence, I think it's kind of filling in as a substitute for what in reality is more of the system, the systemic problem. Like certainly there might not necessarily be specific people who are going to assassinate you if you do this and that, but certainly there are ways in which deviation from the system leads to, consequences, punishment. Because we've got a system, I'm avoiding the C word here, but we've got a system that enforces itself in all kinds of insidious and brutal ways. And I think a lot of fiction struggles to manifest that and instead uses this stand-in for it, which is this idea of the impossibly powerful figures. I don't know, the secret council, the I don't know, whoever you want to talk about, but I think it's playing a substitute role.
Morph, what do you think?
I find it really interesting that there might be a power above Viv, and I don't think having someone pulling the strings will necessarily mean that Viv doesn't agree with what she's doing. I think it just means that there's somebody above her who not even necessarily tells her what to do, but who has complete control. There's people who government policies don't affect other than,
on the basic level, people like Viv in real life, there's always billionaire money behind them. They usually aren't, the sole source of all their, funding and stuff. Like there's always like a network of stuff and people whose interest it's in to advance this, this fascistic, nationalistic, right-wing agenda.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to get at.
So you're saying the systems are the problem, not just the way people use and exploit them?
Speaking about systems being the problem, I don't know if we're saving this for later, but that seems to dovetail quite neatly into Viv's speech about the erstwhile sites that she gives to the people, because there was a detail in that speech that I thought was very, very important, which is that she says these problems of refugees and overflow and people needing to be housed will go on forever. She makes the point that these problems will never be solved, there will never be a solution, they're going to keep coming, we're going to keep having this flow of people, so, our only solution is to put them in, concentration camps and leave them to die. And I think that sense of fatalism and this refusal to even address, actually, the idea of solving the problem is linked to this idea of preserving the system and saying, well, the system's not the problem. Do you see what I'm saying there? It's kind of making excuses for the system and redirecting our attention to, unimaginable cruelty instead of trying to fix the system.
That thing she said about concentration camps, it sort of really, it really reminded me of a lot of things you see on the internet today. People saying well, yeah, it's okay to call illegal immigrants illegals because that's what they are. Really, they're illegal, or they're sort of playing around with words that certain right-wing individuals like to, just today, again on Twitter. I keep making references that things have happened on Twitter, but there was some, political pundit going on about skull sizes, and then they justified themselves by saying, it's not phrenology, it's just craniometry, and they like to play with technicalities, like what Viv was doing. She was trying to sort of take away all the connotations that concentration camp has.
I hate to be the person that brings up Orwell in these kind of conversations, but this is unironically Orwell, because this just isn't vague totalitarian state. It's like 1984 stuff. This is specifically politics in the English language. The idea of certain terms being used or absorbed into the psyche can completely affect how someone thinks of a certain thing. The psychological power of language. Absolutely. Using different terms has an immense effect for sure.
The bit I adored about that whole exchange was how well she normalized the idea of it to her audience, and how cozy r.t.d makes it feel. Like when she jokes about having a concentration of oranges, it sounds quite tasty, and everyone has a little giggle. Or even better, I loved when she quoted Victoria Wood about the tendency of the British people to be complacent, and everyone just has another chuckle. I love how r.t.d's bringing all these elements are very familiar. I don't know if you guys know, but Victoria Wood is very kind of big, kind of, she's passed away now, but she was a very big comedic writer in the British culture. And the way r.t.d brings all those things into making this idea of like horrifying cruelty and slaughter just seem incredibly mundane, and just revealing so clearly how it's something that, you know, your average person can just have a giggle and just completely get used to. I thought that was brilliant.
There's something so warming about Viv. I love Emma Thompson. I think she does it fantastically. I love her voice. I love the way she, even just the subtle movements. I don't know if any of you were you know, paying attention to the movements she made, but in that scene with the concentration.
The word concentration simply means a concentration of anything. You could fill a camp full of oranges, it'd be a concentration camp by dint of the oranges being concentrated. Simple as that one. Made it sound rather tasty.
In that scene with the concentration camps point, she sort of did this hand wave, this you know, when she said, "Oh, I've said enough," and it's motherly. It's like something. It's just so typical of just a kind middle-aged woman, and that she really gives that impression.
I've said enough, thank you.
But when she talks, and when you listen to what she says, it's so clearly the very opposite.
It's funny you say that, Morph, because she absolutely specifically reminded me of another warm and motherly figure in what she was saying about concentration camps, and that is, have any of you seen that BBC news video on Jacob-Rees Mogg's comments on the Boer camps?
Yeah, I think I saw that a while ago. Yeah, it was like February, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They're not a good thing, but where else were people going to live when there was all that war?
Did you just justify the use of concentration camps?
No, I didn't. I'm talking about the Boer War. You're confusing concentration camps with Hitler's extermination camp. These were people who were interned for their safety. Death rates 100 years ago were considerably higher than they are now for all sorts of reasons, including...
Murder.
It was not systematic murder. That's simply wrong. You've got to understand the history of what was going on, not just look at it from the comfort of 2019 and say that this is the same as what was going on with Hitler. It is completely and utterly different, simply wrong.
And yeah, it's such an actual thing r.t.d is writing Viv do here. The use of terminology and that kind of attitude to minimize what is actually being talked about, and it's completely horrifying. It reminds me so much of that scene in Torchwood Children of Earth where the cabinet gets down to brass tacks and discusses which children they're going to offer up to the 456 aliens, and you know it goes right into classism and all these other horrifying things.
I truly don't think there's a better actor in this series than Emma Thompson, just based on that scene alone, and you know, some of the other stuff she's done over the course of the series. But you know, maybe followed by Tania Miller. I think she's truly excellent. I think just her face when she's explaining, this is what we have to do. It's so sort of soppy and sad, but stern, and she's really got a way of putting herself forward as exactly what Viv Rook should have been, exactly the personality politics that gets people into such high places.
I mean, Viv is more charismatic and compelling a Prime Minister than any of the last several we've actually had in real life.
Yeah, that goes for over here as well.
I think that's sort of indicative. Of her links to Boris Johnson as well, I have to say.
Before we get too up in Boris mania with all the shit that's going on with the Tory leadership contest, I have to just stress that thing about the Boer War concentration camps again, because obviously that's the one that Rees Mogg was talking about in that Question Time clip, and I thought that scene, when Viv brings it up and just uses the example of how concentration camps are just so ingrained in British history, and this is a piece of British history that is not taught, you know, in schools. This is not something that people particularly know or care about or remember, with obviously Rees Mogg being a perfect example of how the memory of them is just apologised for and excused and erased. And I thought r.t.d illustrating how the UK goes back towards concentration camps by invoking that history that maybe a lot of viewers may just not know about, and in some senses it's almost taboo to talk about in a public capacity in British media, to just openly acknowledge, you know, our own atrocities, because there is so much jingoism and so much apologia and kind of historical amnesia going on in our culture with this stuff. I thought it was borderline radical and quite confrontational for r.t.d to just foreground found that so much on primetime BBC. I absolutely adored that. I think that was just, it's almost enough to make me forgive the horseshoe theory shit from last week. Literally, I loved this so much because it makes it feel, it just reminded me that actually r.t.d, he's not some milquetoast hand-wringer. He's got principles. He's not some, gibbering and establishment sympathizer, right? He is completely capable of expressing political anger and political purpose. I just fucking love that. I can't effuse about this enough.
It's such a sharp contrast to how a certain other show has treated Winston Churchill in the past.
The treatment of concentration camps I found interesting. Katz, I don't know if you agree, but I find that Australia's, none of these positioning strategies need to be used at all. People just completely accept them, I guess because the people in them that have been othered so much. But I never hear PR strategies to really justify ours, to anything like that degree.
Oh yeah,
people
totally.
just accept it.
Yeah, they don't need to. People just go on about their daily lives knowing that that kind of stuff's happening. But it's happening to brown people and it's happening overseas, so it doesn't matter.
And overseas is, it's barely away. It's right there.
I mean, you could very much make the argument that it's in this case in years and years. Like the fact that it's only going to be possibly contentious and possibly a problem because it's them, it's the populous British people, and of course white people and such, and people who are like us going in the camps, rather than people over there going in the camps, which people wouldn't give a shit about.
Labour camps. That's what they called them last time. What do you mean?
Yeah, I liked when they had that copy-pasted scene from Turn Left in the episode with people being rehoused and having to share houses and stuff.
With the whole of southern England flooded with radiation, 7 million people in need of relocation, and now France has closed its borders.
It's a big house, room for all. Welcome. In you come.
I thought this was our house.
Yes, many people's house. It's wonderful. In.
And the rise of the Cybermen as well, the kind of collecting the homeless, which are disappearing, and the spooky rumours about where the homeless are going as well.
Oh, smell that, comrades. Burgers and chips, sausage and bean. All those people disappearing off the streets. It's been going on for months. It's them. They're taking you away. Take them away.
And even, this one's more of a stretch, but the disappeared even reminded me of Hell Bent, in that Edith knows they're real because of the memory hole about them online, in that she searches for them and there's nothing there, and what isn't there kind of provides a shape of what to look for because it's so distinct in what's been removed, which is how the 12th Doctor kind of remembers Clara in the end, if you remember.
I was so disappointed that the erstwhile camps weren't called the formerly camps.
Oh, right, yeah, the whole disappeared thing. The disappeared, it sounds like it could be like the title of a Torchwood audio or something. I thought that whole plot line, I was convinced it was going to go in a more overtly sci-fi direction. Because giving it a title like that, The Disappeared, it makes it feel very mythic. And almost in that kind of sort of Pizzagate realm of kind of these incredibly kind of dark and crazy stuff happening. With the blackouts, I thought we were going to find out maybe the blackouts across Britain were whenever they're using all that power to run the gigantic people mincing machine or something not quite that, but something in that vein of oh my god, I didn't expect this, some crazy twist of what they might be doing with the disappeared people. But no, it was actually something quite very grounded and very mundane. It was just these concentration camps. And also this something vaguely reminded me of when Margaret Atwood wrote The Handmaid's Tale. She made a point of only including stuff that had actually been done in history somewhere, but at some point in sort of time. And that feels almost a bit like what r.t.d is doing here. Rather than making up some absurd thing for the government to do, he just keeps it very grounded in stuff that Britain has done before, basically. I think that's great.
The blackouts specifically, that was in 2017, Ukraine kept having cyberattacks from blackouts. I remember that being all write-ups about it back 2 years ago. I also liked with the blackouts how they were kind of timed comedically to the music in the montage.
And the blackouts continue.
Blackouts are cyberattacks. Could be Russia, could be ISIS, could be teenagers in a bedroom.
The blackouts were really interesting because in that scene with Viv and Stephen, Stephen's like, oh yeah, those Russian blackouts, and then she's like, oh, don't be daft. I suppose
Yes.
you could take that two ways. One, the blackouts are just like some kind of a government inefficiency, and their power systems aren't coping with the floods or whatever, and they blame the Russians. Or alternatively, and this I suppose is a more interesting idea, albeit less likely, it's Viv's way of sort of implementing the blink, just randomly.
Oh shit! I forgot about that.
Wow, interesting.
Really tiny detail, but did anybody else notice the billboard above Woody's car that said Viv says preserve energy, but it was an electrical billboard.
Yeah, that's cool. I liked those billboards. I remember when I lived in Korea, there'd be so many billboards of like certain people's faces, flashing and changing electronically from like different ads, like kind of like rotating posters. I really like that. Is that are they used regularly in London or whatever? I don't live in a city, so these might be normal elsewhere.
Not necessarily the electronic ones, but you do normally see billboards of people who are already in power. Like Sadiq Khan might have gotten billboards of things that he said about what he's going to do to London next year or whatever.
You get mechanical ones that are sort of on like those slats that kind of rotate rather than. I wouldn't say the sort of electronic ones are that common, but they're around. Yeah, you get stuff like that occasionally.
Something, I don't know if any of you have worked or currently work in customer service, but I used to work retail, and I was reminded very much of those experiences when that girl Rosie was talking with about the legality concerning a food truck or whatever was actually like right there a few meters away from her, but had a curtain in front of her and was displaying across a screen to her just to kind of mitigate how angry people get when they're dealing with people in those roles.
Yeah, that was quite funny. just the irony of just being in the next room and just talking through a screen. That felt a bit like, technology. But I do see how it has like that very much just that sensible and kind of logical real-world application, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. I see that the idea is, technology's bad and we're removing human face-to-face contact and whatever. But sometimes I think, especially in jobs like that where you're over-a-counter dealing with somebody's life and somebody's how they how they earn their money, their living. People can get really particularly angry at anything, any kind of customer service. So sometimes that is necessary.
People are the dehumanization has already happened, and how loathsome people get to like the customer service person in that situation. So I think it's a completely fair Hail Mary to have them behind a little screen, even if they're right there for their own sake. I completely empathized with that lady.
Do you think if the show were to take us into a KFC or a McDonald's, it would all be the self-service kiosks?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's already almost that. We're getting there. Speaking of technology, should we talk about Bethany's Kininaru operation? Her whole thing getting their stuff implanted into her.
I loved when she did the wave with the fingers to cause the blackout. I loved how she looked like a magician casting a spell. I really liked the body movement of that. I thought it was really cool.
I like when she drew the tick on the screen.
Bethany working with Edith I found really particularly interesting. Willingly working with Edith.
Yeah, Bethany's becoming quite the superhero figure of the show, isn't she? Like, she's got all the cool hacker powers, and she's helping Edith kind of with her heroic quests and stuff. And Bethany very much seems to be on the rise in terms of the series. She's very happy with her technology and how that's all going, and she's exerting more and more control and ability to access stuff. Like, she's kind of becoming almost a central figure.
I like how she's kind of a personal nanny state unto herself, with how she can track all her family in much the same way the government tracks, its citizens.
The way she glared at Stephen at the end of that episode was terrifying. That she's going to be his downfall, absolutely.
She's going to send so much spam to his inbox. It was interesting how her... I'm going to pull a dilb here. She kind of draws joy from globalism or global interconnectivity, maybe, with how she was going through all that data from different countries and loving the interconnectivity of it. Whereas Stephen's, so annoyed about... he feels she's indebted to the government, and I think he's just mad in general that she is happy and he is not. And she's so exuberantly happy when she gets those surgeries done on her. A really interesting contrast between the daughter and the father there.
I thought it was interesting that she derived joy from watching the slow progress of the world's destruction by climate change. But in generally, between that sequence and Muriel's eye macular degeneration being cured, I felt this episode was it was more on the technology good front than the technology bad front.
I liked Gran just spending the money on her own eyes. I'm sure some people will kick up a fuss and say, oh, you're the older grandparent, it's your job to leave, blah, blah, blah. But she already lets them live in a house. She's done so much for them already. I think it's totally fair that she uses her own money to fix up her eyes.
That made me so happy, to be honest. I love the way she delivered that. But she'd already spent 10,000 on Rosie, hadn't she? I feel like it was very deserved. And in her last few... It could be even months, but in her last time on Earth, she deserves that.
I love she was just like, Sodom. Certainly they've and in this episode we saw how the family is so broken at this point. They all virtually abandon her, except for Celeste, of course. So I think she deserves to have she can do what hell she wants at this point. Well, except for how she treated Celeste with that fucking gong.
Was very alarming. It's Celeste in a kind of housemaid role. I hate this on every level.
The optics of that from a racial perspective are a bit...
Yes, especially seeing the certain comments Muriel has made in the past about people of other races. I assumed that racial undertone was very, very intended.
To stay with Muriel after everything that she's being put through, Celeste is a saint, isn't she? Celeste is just so kind good. And just, yeah...
Easily my favourite character. I love so much that I was so wrong in her at the start, and I stan her so hard now. Fantastic character, fantastic performance. Really hope... I hope her ending is strong, whether it's happy or bad. I just hope, this character gets what they deserve. In terms of they get good writing in the last episode.
So full of ambition and verve. She's going to get what she deserves.
I kind of live in hope. Every episode that she's going to slip back into her accent like she did occasionally. Blasted full man.
That's great.
Is it excellent?
You make a sad mistake.
On that note of, on that musical note of music, I liked leaving Rosie's zone. Really interesting guitar notes that were kind of playing around in the score. And like we said earlier, the Torchwoody investigating music I thought was really cool.
Slight Weight pays £500,000 a year for clinical support to Yes Chain. And sitting on the board of Yes Chain is Vivian Rook.
Oh, I bet she is.
Where you are?
I'll go find it.
They're 2 doors away. Oh my God.
And the new ending music that wasn't marred by a BBC person speaking over the credits was very pleasing. What a nice surprise.
I loved when Stephen was about to drop Victor in the concentration camp. I loved that those creepy ass strings going massively intense there. Oh, that was very good. That was sort of like peak gold there in terms of his horror themes, a bit Weeping Angels.
Transfer Victor Garaya.
The music from the very beginning of Edith's scene with Slight and Weight, right the way to the end where her breathing's heavy and she's talking to Bethany is excellent. It plays the whole way through and it goes through so many different peaks.
Erstwhile.
They're on your corridor. They're getting closer.
There was a nice track sort of near the start where Rosie and Jonjo are talking just before it goes through one of those year flash forwards, which had, I think, a accordion in it. I thought it was pretty nice, and you don't really hear Murray Gold use that kind of instrument often. It's sort of more orchestral, but I thought it was really nice, a sort of Disney sounding.
When I was a kid, 2028 sounded like the future. Like we'd all have jetpacks and monorails and be taking our food in little pills like astronauts. Here it is. I'm telling you, we're not astronauts.
I like that John Joe seemed to turn out to be fine. Like, he seems he's very accepted in the family, and he seems like a nice bloke. There didn't seem to be any problems with him. Although I still think Edith is right.
I had a feeling John Joe would be fine.
But yeah, he seems totally fine, which is a relief. What did you think of the bedroom law where if you have 2 or more spare bedrooms, you need to house some homeless in your house? I thought it was one of those things. It reminds me of, you know, those people where it's like you've got to do your part to combat climate change. You've got to drive a different car and you've got to use different bags and you've got to do this and that, which is all like, yeah, but it's kind of offloading the more structural problems onto the individual. Like, I agree that, you know, if a middle-class family has spare houses, there are certainly situations where I can see better uses for them, but I would have liked some clarity on, are all those, I don't know if England gets this as well, but do you have a bunch of buildings owned by foreigners that are more or less empty?
We've got like, empty properties and stuff. We've got loads of those. Like London's got a shit ton, and I feel like that's probably still going to be the case in the future as well. Like this whole thing of like take people in, I think that's absolutely a case of we can't be fucked to deal with the actual problems. We can't be bothered housing these people. We can't be bothered putting them in these empty properties that are just owned by whoever the fuck. Like, you know, you take them. I think it's absolutely one of those things.
Yeah, I think it sounds vaguely fair on the surface, but without knowledge on are all the rich people's mansions filled up? Are all these foreign-owned buildings filled up? Like, I don't think the population is at the kind of level where this is probably necessary. Yeah, I think this is offloading it onto the people.
I mean, part of how so much of our political institution has just worked for ages now is this idea of fake necessity and disguising the fact that everything that is being done and that is happening is essentially a political choice. You know, like austerity, you know, the Tories and the Lib Dems kind of, that was just, there's this whole kind of mindset that all of these things are crucial and that they must be done, there's nothing else we can do. And it's just a great way of just obscuring the fact that actually everything is just being done on purpose. And the same is true for this whole situation in Years and Years. Like, it's absolutely this idea of fake necessity. And it's worked its way into Viv's concentration camp speech as well.
It all goes back to that end of history delusion where everyone thinks the current state of things is arbitrarily the best state of things, or at least the final state of things. This is how things are and there is no other way they can be. They have to be this way. It's totally normal for a system to completely collapse every 10 to 15 years. That's just how economics are meant to work and how they will work forever. You know, it's all these delusions, and even the so-called people cognizant of reality like Danny and Stephen in the first episode, they still buy into these same sort of delusions that the status quo is somehow ordained or perfect or at least final.
It's really easy to forget that our civilization is a civilization just like, you know, I don't know, the Romans or the Mayans. And this is kind of a stark reminder that anything can happen.
Yep.
Speaking of history and things repeating themselves, you know, Neo, you've been stressing for a while that you expect the series to end on this case of multi-generational living in one house, and I feel this episode maybe preempts that a bit by showing first how the family is incredibly fragmented. So, you know, so just before the finale, they're all broken, they're all over the place, they're leaving Muriel alone on their own in the house, and maybe that will then be reversed in the finale, and we'll see them all come back together for the big finish, as it were. We love stories.
I don't want Stephen there if this is going to happen.
I find it really interesting now how, you know, it was an extended family originally, and now it's still a maternal household, but it's now a matrilocal household. There's absolutely no men in it at all, and it is intergenerational.
Oh
yeah, I don't even notice. When I was a kid, 2028 sounded like the future.
Even now, 2028 still sounds a bit like the future, even though it's not very far away at all. I think certain numbers have. Yeah, like certain numbers have just taken on this sort of futuristic gravity, which they'll only lose when we actually get to them and we're like, oh shit, yeah, it's not the future, it's just the present and it's still crap.
Wasn't Blade Runner set in like 2018 or something? And it still kind of sounds like a futuristic year to me, even though that's in the past. You could sell me Cyberpunk 2019 and I'd sound, ooh, that sounds sci-fi, even though, you know, I'm living in it.
I feel like we still haven't quite like faced up to just the fact that Stephen has just completely become a monster now. Like that shot of when Bethany saw his face over the webcam and his creepy smile when he dropped Victor into the folder. Oh my god! I mean, I didn't scream, but I was like, ah! Like that was freaky as fuck. And it's so interesting to make one of the family members like pretty much as adjacent to a villain or an antagonist as you can get.
I was utterly convinced earlier on that he was the banker, and then he was the one who lost the money. And I was sort of convinced that he'd get the redemption arc. Like, he was part of the problem, but now he's realised his ways. He votes Labour now. He's trying to make changes. But with the cheating, and certainly with this, that's definitely not the way it's going. He's definitely the antagonist, and I love it.
I mean, the bike scene in that previous episode, that feels like foreshadowing for this now. I was wondering what was that signifying, where was that going to lead? And I think this idea of Stephen just becoming this sadist almost is like the logical culmination of that.
It's the idea that he has nothing himself now. He's always been the complacent yes man, and getting to kind of relieve himself in these little ways of harming other people, which actually have massive effects. Like, that man with the bike definitely lost his job and possibly lost a lot of other stuff in his life, and Victor has now completely lost everything. He's in a concentration camp. These have massive effects. I'm not even entirely convinced he knows what he's doing, but he certainly gets a rush out of it.
That ending of episode 3 just now is kind of reframed for me. Its purpose seems to make more sense now, given Stephen's turn as a villain. That really sets up a lot of his psychology, in hindsight, yeah. I hate to watch Stephen relieve himself. I really do.
Also, I love he admits this episode that he doesn't particularly like Elaine. I thought that we got that funny scene last week where she was kind of kicking him out at 6 a.m, which is kind of setting that up. But it's like, he's just so, I mean, he's the archetype of just fuck my shit up, isn't it? Like, he's just completely screwed the pooch. He's just living with this woman, and it's all gone to hell, really, hasn't it?
Stephen's future is a fucking nightmare.
Do you like guys like Strax's cameo this week? Dan Starkey showing up to take Muriel's house.
His voice, if not his face, was so recognisable.
Oh, I knew I recognised him.
Also, if we're quickly running off actor appearances, Bethany, her actor, is going to be in Dracula, isn't she? That's such great news. I believe, yeah.
Yeah, I did look at. I looked at everyone's acting stuff the other day. So I looked at Tania Miller's wiki and everything, and I couldn't find anything for Bethany. All I could find was her agency. And on the bio it said she'd filmed for years and years, and that now she's filming for Dracula, so that's quite exciting.
I was curious if Morph or Katz had any interesting takes on the show in general that, they had yet to share. On the show in general? Yeah, anything you like.
I suppose I was sort of talking the other day about how it's quite fixed now, isn't it? It's quite a timely show. It's broadcast in 2019 to a 2019 audience. I'm not sure that r.t.d really worries about how it's going to be perceived in the future. It's about getting his point across today, showing people, however many people watch it. I haven't looked at the ratings, but showing people that the world is changeable, and the world that we're living in now isn't perfect, and it's not even good by any means. It's quite fixed, I think, is my point. It's never going to change from what it is today. In fact, it's only going to lose weight because of its predictions of the near future and stuff. It's not going to seem the same to an audience 10 years down the line as it will today. Anybody who understands it, that is.
That's just the irony of science fiction, is authors predict the future, but really they're just illustrating the present, or at least their conception of it, because that's all they can do. You can only think in the status quo of the time, and everything you write exposes the neuroses of the specific time. So yeah, I don't think this show will age well, but I think it'll age in a way very indicative of the kind of headspace of 2019, which has its own value, for sure.
I completely agree. I just think that r.t.d is aware of this. I think that's definitely something he's intentionally doing. I don't think he really cares, in fact, how it's actually going to be received in the future. I don't think he cares that it will go down in history like Doctor Who will or anything else. I think he wants to get his political message across. It's like publishing a blog.
When he was doing Doctor Who, he was very much writing for the weekly broadcast, not writing for the DVD box set. I think you can really tell in a lot of his episodes, and I totally see, look at the series 1 finale. Although I think that has aged well, it's very much writing for 2005, not writing for Doctor Who fans all across the future. So yeah, I completely agree with you. He's aware that he's writing for 2019, and he's totally happy with that, because that's what he likes doing, writing timely stuff for the time.
It even links to his writer's tale quote about how the Series 3 finale, he just made it up as he went along. He writes very much for the now, like the very instant, and after that point it barely matters. Like his TV is an event. You know, you see it happens, and then, you know, maybe you forget about it, but you were entertained in that instant, and that's what r.t.d. lives for, maybe.
And arguably, that style sort of works better now than ever before, because of how fast the news is, how late you can sort of cut things in, like that Theresa May Brexit radio.
Yeah.
Was edited in the first episode. So having really current TV writing for the weekly broadcast is not only is it easier, it's also more relevant with how interconnected we all are.
I've got one more thing, if that's possible. Okay, just quickly, I thought it was ironic that even while she was kind of, even though I said earlier it was so cool for r.t.d. to bring up the concentration camps and the Boer War as a way of linking it to what Viv was doing, I thought it was ironic how even in that speech, Viv elided the actual purpose of the camps. Even she was doing that Jacob-Rees Mogg-esque kind of whitewashing of them, because you're saying, well, you know, it was just, they were refugees, they're in the camps. Like, no, like, the camps were an instrument of war. Kitchener was doing a scorched earth policy, right, burning farms, slaughtering livestock, and bringing in people specifically as a way of wearing down the resistance, right? So in essence, like, it's just, I think it was a kind of an interesting kind of parallel to how, no, okay, I'm just waffling now, fuck it, but like, that was just, I thought that was, it's just interesting to see how on every single level that historical amnesia works its way in.